The next day, John was there again with 2 of his disciples. When he saw Jesus passing by, he said, "Look, the Lamb of God." When the 2 disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them following and asked, "What do you want?" They said, "Rabbi, where are you staying?" "Come," he replied, "and you will see." So they went and saw where he was staying, and they spent that day with him. Over the past 2 to 3 years, I have found my head turned and my heart caught by the transformative glimpse of God I have experienced through Christian community. Like the 2 disciples, I have felt this glimpse feed a deeper curiosity, prompting me to follow and ultimately be invited to come and see. To this end, this 2023, I am embarking on a 6-month journey to dwell with various Christian communities. On the way, I'll be sharing interviews with community members, founders, and leaders to learn more about the blessings, challenges, and wisdom these dwelling places of God hold. In doing so, I hope to inform how it is we might nurture people and communities to be transformative manifestations of God, offering a glimpse of the divine and inviting people to come and see God's loving dwelling place.
Hi there everyone, I'm Chris. I am not someone who is currently in a big community, but I am part of a very small community called 201 Coleridge Road. This is a community that Lakshmi started. It's just a Christian house in Cambridge. And we are switching up the format though. Instead of being interviewed, I will be interviewing Lakshmi.
And we're also very good friends.
Sorry.
Is the main connection point here.
Nah, I don't think so.
And Chris took my room in 201 when I moved out, so that was a very handy...
Forcibly stole it.
God-given switch.
Yeah, it was very blessed.
It was very blessed.
I called you up like 2 weeks before and was like, if you know there's a room in Cambridge, will you just like let me know?
Well, I'm thinking of going on sabbatical for 6 months.
It was class. And we have 2 very, very close friends called Josh and Hanya. Will you say a little bit about them?
We were just met at the university chaplaincy, and they've been just solid core friends ever since. And just this friendship group, being able to journey alongside each other as friends has been really important and really special. And just had lunch with you guys before heading off to Durham and finally off to the US.
Which is amazing. Really cool. Yeah. If you hear us slurping in the background, we've got a couple of cups of tea. We're sitting in our workplace, just so you're aware. In the WeWork, yes. Actually, I recognise that one of the reasons I asked you to do this as for me to interview you was because I kind of just wanted a life update and to be able to hear what's really been the learnings from your year of going around lots of communities, because that is a sort of wisdom and experience that I definitely don't have and would love to hear more about. Perhaps, would you mind kicking us off just by saying what you did, and then afterwards maybe why you did it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what I did, well, maybe I will answer a bit of the why first, but I was feeling really called to go deeper into exploring Christian community, mostly from having lived at Lynn's house in Cambridge for 2 years, which is a L'Arche-inspired community, and just... around friendship along lines of ability. So you have people both with and without learning disabilities, and really seeing the gospel being lived out in a very real way there. And sorry.
What do you mean by that?
There's a joy about it. There's a celebration of people. They're seeing people in their full humanity. Especially given the context of ability, there's a sense in which people with learning disabilities are often quite invisible, and when are visible are maybe seen more as people to look after or to manage. And in Lynn's house, just really seeing a celebration of people and really learning about people as individuals. I'm like, wow, like they're so gifted at this, or like they have such a gift of just making us all laugh, and seeing that very powerfully, and seeing God so vividly in people. And just the times of prayer that we share as well. Carol and Debbie especially gifted at creating very beautiful liturgies and moments of shared prayer, which are suitable for people across different abilities. And it's the kind of place that it reaches the heart, and something feels alive. And I think even if you're not a person of faith, you can walk into that kind of setting and feel like this place is operating in a different way than mainstream secular society. So I've asked my little sister, being like, can you feel at least something? She's like, yeah. And then when you actually live there and praying and eating with your community members, and they all feel like brothers and sisters to me now, and being able to share faith. The people on the steering group at Lynn's house, just a very wise bunch of people. But also holding on to the sense that they're not just the wise ones. As a community, there's a collective shared wisdom of being together, and that being really profound. And the fact that you don't have to have a PhD and whatever to be wise, but that really there is a shared wisdom about the whole place, which rests on joy and vulnerability, and seeing God in everyone. So yeah.
I know from our other chats that you found it hugely impactful for who you are and your life direction as well. Which is incredible. Was that why? So that experience you were like, this was amazing. This can't be the only one. Let's go and check out others. Yeah,
it was. I guess Lynn's house convicted me that. The phrase I keep coming back to is that Christian communities can be real places of social and spiritual transformation. So I personally felt a huge spiritual transformation during my time at Lynn's house, because it has kind of its own spirituality as well, like a very embodied spirituality, which can't be written down, but just exists there. And socially in terms of, turning things a bit upside down in their heads, or suddenly people who are mostly invisible suddenly becoming the centerpiece of this community. And then just because of the circles and Cambridge Christian connections, people had told me that there are some other communities. Someone told me about Utopian Dreams written by Tobias Jones, which is someone who went around different communities around the world then started a community in the UK, which I have now visited.
Awesome.
And then I kept being I just need to visit communities, and I want to do a sabbatical just visiting communities. And every conversation I ended up in, I would be talking about Lynn's house and community and the fact that I wanted to visit communities. And then some people were just you should just do it. It's
I wonder who those people were saying you should just do it.
And it was kind of a group. So Tim was really encouraging, and then Anna helped me discern the 6-month timeline. So I was like, do I do a year, 2 years, 6 months? And then long COVID was actually really instrumental in the push. It was a very contemplative time. I couldn't really do much.
Perhaps just explain what happened and then where you were before going into long COVID and what you were like after going into long COVID and what that changed.
Before. I think basically the long COVID gave me the push to move on, and that I was finding work that I absolutely loved and found fulfilling suddenly became very hard. And there was a sense in which I wasn't able to operate in a 9-to-5 way anymore. And I'd moved on from Lynn's house and still settling into 201, so I was maybe not as robustly settled as I previously had been. And then also just physically the screen just really tired me out with the long COVID. And so I think it just gave me the nudge to move. And then kind of Damaris came into the picture, and then America came into the picture. So I was like, okay, if I want to visit communities, it has to be... Now, to be fair, I'd actually decided to visit communities before meeting him, so... But then it fit well in that slot. And And so it was recognising that there was this desire in my heart to do this and then actually taking the leap. And I think when something like illness kind of shakes your world up a bit, it just helps give you the push. Because my job was amazing at Rose Castle Foundation. It's a bit crazy to leave it because it's such an amazing employer. But the long COVID ultimately gave me the nudge that I needed.
To step out the door.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I'd always wanted to kind of step off the treadmill, as I call it, and just be able to follow kind of, where I feel like I'm being led.
Cool. And you obviously then went out and visited lots of communities over. It's kind of like speed dating for communities is what I kind of like imagine it to be, which is incredible. One of the things that I've like thought about was like, there's like hundreds of communities in the UK, I'm sure. How did you you're quite a rigorous person and like you do things quite methodically, whereas I'd just be like, I should pick these ones. How did you go about like deciding which communities to go visit? And then, tell us a little about that.
So I wouldn't say there are hundreds, but there are a good handful, maybe approaching 100. Started off with the classic Google, Christian communities in the UK, which basically brings up your bigger retreat centres, so Iona, Lee Abbey, Scargill. But I didn't want to do too many of those because they're similar models. So I ended up doing Iona and Scargill, and then Hillfield, which I'd heard about through Lynn's house, because brother Sam used to be linked to Lynn's house, and he's also associated to Hillfield. And then the Diggers and Dreamers website, which is a network of communities in general, not just Christian, but they do have a Christian section. So I scouted that one out. I knew about Windsor Hill Wood through this book, Utopian Dreams, written by Tobias Jones. And on their website, they very helpfully have the communities which inspired them. So I had a look at those. And then just word of mouth, because I ended up talking about community with everyone, it meant that I found out about this urban community in Birmingham. I also found about the urban community in Durham by word of mouth. I also heard about Love Bristol that way, which was really helpful because they're the ones which you basically need to know the name of the community to find them on Google. So just word of mouth. And so now I do have this directory of communities, which you've now seen, Chris, which was built by word of mouth, and people hearing what I'm doing, always so generous with sharing what they have. I'm like, oh, have you heard about these communities? And I WhatsApp it to myself and then collated it onto a database. So then I had a sense of what they were. I did it mostly geographically. So I did like the whole of the Southwest in one clump.
Cool.
And just made, so then I plotted them all on a map using Google My Maps. I had this beautiful spreadsheet with the address of all the communities, input it into Google My Maps, and then it puts all the pins across the map. And I'm like, okay. And then these are all in one cluster, these are there, and so I figured it out that way.
I didn't know anything about this. This is amazing. That's so good.
And Iona happened, and also some communities I went for, like the larger communities where you actually have to book. Those had fixed dates. So I went for Iona's work week and I went to Scargill's work week. So they were set dates that I had to work around. And there were some which fell through in terms of planning, but I fixed the fixed ones and then contacted others being like, I'm going to be in this region. Would it work to visit?
That's pretty cool. So it sounds like you've gone from, I had a very meaningful experience in community myself. I would love to do this. This is a dream. Pushed out the door by COVID, and now you're in the planning phase of like going crazy with it, and then
and the planning phase actually happened during long COVID, so I was absolutely knackered. Like I could just not do much at all. But when I had an ounce of energy, the thing which was giving me energy was thinking about communities and nation databases.
The thrill.
So that was a sign within myself that despite being so deplete of energy, this was something which was still giving me energy. And actually part of the tour was also the fact that I'm part of a small group who are discerning the creation of a community with the Rose Castle Foundation and realising that I'd only experienced Lynn's house, and that's one model of community, but wanting to learn from different models of community. I didn't want it to be biased towards my personal lived experience. So I wanted to learn more about how different places do it.
So it's almost like laying the foundations of the groundwork for future community building yourself as well.
Which people were quite surprised by, because I think other people have done different visits of communities, but usually with the mindset of which one I'm going to join. which wasn't my mindset at all. I'm going to America. I hope to come back to Rose Castle Foundation in Cumbria, which meant that I could do it a lot more objectively, and ended up visiting communities, which I know I wouldn't ever be a part of, but visited them.
Yeah, totally. And you can pick all the best bits from all of them.
And learn from them.
Yeah.
And so it was very much with wanting to learn from them.
The question that I now have around, after we've set like the foundations for understanding the picture of why you've started doing this and what you've started to do, is kind of like, I kind of want to mine a little bit of the learnings of it all, your experiences, the patterns, the people that you met that were particularly important on this journey. Which part of that would you like to dive into?
Probably, like, one of the main things that I've taken away is gaining an awareness of the different types of Christian community and feeling like they can be categorised into different types, if that's helpful.
Yeah, interesting. Why?
So the ones which emerged were kind of retreat centres as models of community. So in that category, there's the Iona community, Lee Abbey, Scargill is an offshoot of Lee Abbey. Hillfield have also gone for that model. And that's the model where there's usually a relatively robust residential community of 20 plus who sustain a retreat centre, or like, they don't all use the language of retreat centre, but like dealing with near permanent guests coming in and out. So that's one model, and their rhythms are quite intensive. So I personally wouldn't feel like I'd be able to be in one for particularly long, because there's just such an influx of people all the time. And those communities are generally more extroverted in profile. Then there are the urban communities. They're often linked to a church of some sorts. Birmingham's not so young, but Love Bristol and Durham have a younger age profile. And they make a point of really rooting in the locality, often quite deprived economically locality, and just being in that area and getting involved in local projects. And I don't really want to use the language of ministering too, because it is more of a sense of being and sharing in the life of those people. And I really appreciated those. I'm not an urban person, but those communities really pleasantly kind of struck me in terms of, the way that they exist and how in tune they are with the local area. So it's not like they don't do a specific thing necessarily, but they tune into what can be helped with in the community. And then the other main category is therapeutic communities is the wrong word, but maybe communities of belonging. So in that category I would put Pilsden and Windsor Hill Wood. And they're communities for people in crisis, is the language that they use. So it might be people who are in really heavy grief, people who are wanting to recover from addiction issues, people who have bad place with their mental health. These communities also sometimes have people with learning disabilities. And so there isn't such a flux of guests. They take people occasionally like me, but the main thing is just belonging as a community. There's often an agricultural component, so there's rhythms of working the land, looking after the animals, and kind of those rhythms of work, like helping people in their recovery and giving them something to do with their hands, like shared meals and things. So those ones feel more like families and place of belonging. And that's the model which really speaks to my heart in terms of wanting to be able to create spaces of belonging for people who find it hard to belong in mainstream society or often invisible in mainstream society. So there's some the emerging categories. And then the ones which are approaching what I'd call new monastic communities versus intentional Christian communities. So in that category I'd put Chamel Neuf and Madonna House, who are both characterised by the fact that you can take lifelong promises and can become take vows of chastity or become a consecrated single. And so they're inching their way to more more traditional monasticism without being traditionally monastic. So those are my categories.
I was kind of trying to relate them back to Jesus, all of them. That was something that I was trying to do with like
interesting.
like the therapeutic ones might be more healing, for example, or like the ones which are urban communities might just be discipleship. You know, like how Jesus just spent time with 12 friends for a very long time, and like like that changed them. Or even the like people coming to Jesus seeking something, seeking to be fed, like in the feeding of the loaves and the fishes with like the retreat centers almost. How are we going to feed all those people? I just kind of like, I was like trying to think it through.
Yeah, I like that.
Who is someone that you met along the way that is very special to you now?
So,
other than Jesus.
There is Gwyneth, who I met at Love Bristol, who is also really passionate about community, and I just felt really seen by her and very empowered by her. And likewise by Sue. Basically, I often feel most seen by women who are 50 plus. And I don't know what it is about them. And both Gwyneth and Sue portray such a beautiful type of leadership and very gentle leadership. There's a sense in which you have female leaders and like even the female politicians that we've had, but display quite masculine ways of leadership or like still very much in that way of leading. Whilst with Gwyneth and Sue, I'm almost hesitant to use the language of leadership because it's just so, it's more like a mothering or a nurturing or like a really seeing people very deeply and wanting to help them flourish and being able to hold the space or see what can be done to help them flourish. So that's been very inspiring. And then also someone about my age who I met at Iona, who came all the way from Malaysia, I think, to experience the Iona community. Kind of special person to bounce off like community passion with.
Would you mind describing them to us?
Huh?
Would you mind describing that person to us?
Yeah. She... we'd both experienced the phenomenon of young Christians who might have an experience of living in community or going on like a pilgrimage, a sustained pilgrimage, or like sustained kind of Christian project thing, coming back really, really enlivened in their faith, but then not finding it being fed in their home church or parish. And that desire to do more, but the church is not being alongside them in the doing more. And where community comes into that. And so there aren't any such models in Malaysia, is what she was saying, and hence why she came to the UK to experience how it could be done. But she wrote a master's on reimagining church, so there's a podcast with her, if people want to listen, and talking about her idea of church. And for both of us, there was also a concern about where the elderly fit into community, because a lot of the retreat centre models, you have to be actually really quite physically fit to be able to operate in them. The ones where you take lifelong promises or vows, then you're looked after. Yeah. But then if it's not that kind of community, often they're not places that you're meant to grow old. They're places that you're meant to move on from, with the exception of Pilsden. But we were she was talking about a community model which would acknowledge the elderly and how they could be incorporated into a community model.
It sounds like these people were influential because they resonated with you in some meaningful way. Obviously, you went to kind of like examine and like learn from lots of these communities. Often the work we do works on us more than we work on it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like in my own life, I've definitely experienced that. How have you changed because of it?
For me, it's mostly been I've regained a lot of confidence. Long COVID left me in a feeling quite vulnerable in many ways, or just lost a huge amount of confidence. I couldn't socialise anymore. I was finding it hard to just talk to my friends. And so there's been a real sense of refinding myself. While I was absolutely loving my job at Rose Castle Foundation, it wasn't fully me in terms of like the call to community. And so it's enabled me to really grow in what I felt called to do. And so there's that feeling of being in tune with where you're meant to be. And I think this is really what I was meant to do. And the fact that's leading on to my study and just like feeding this like overarching picture of where I think my life might be headed. And to find that at my age as well, being such a gift. So there's a sense of, I liked using the language of resonant frequency when describing vocation.
Yeah.
And there's a sense in which like I am resonating at my resonant frequency at the moment. And so a real sense of thriving, and also just in terms of entering relationship as well, kind of growing in myself and rooting in a sense of personal identity or personal strength, or like having a personal foundation before kind of more seriously merging foundations with someone, and actually visiting all of these communities in parallel to visiting different communities has also been a really great space for just reflecting on my personal life, and working through various things about relationship which I needed to work through, and so it's been a really good holding space for that.
Wicked. It sounds like you're saying, and I'd love to hear if I'm right or wrong, that you've gone through a period of change quite a lot, and coming back to the foundations again, it sounds like what you've been doing this last year.
Mm-hmm.
But either in terms of relationship, social life, spiritual life, maybe. Was that because of communities, or was that just because you were doing what you think God was calling you to at that particular time?
I think there's something to be said for being detached from the grind of, like, inverted commas, everyday life. And so not doing a job for someone, not doing a research project for someone, but just being able to turn up in all of these spaces fully as me. And finding God in, like, the conversations that I've had with people. You know when you get those, like, really timely conversations? I'm like, wow, thank you. And in the little things, praying in very different ways and being exposed to different community spirituality, noticing how those were making me feel and contributing or feeling challenging to my prayer life. And so I think it's about the space, the spaciousness of it. So even though I've been quite busy travelling, I've only been accountable to myself in quite a selfish way. I haven't had any responsibilities during this time other than to myself, which isn't how one should live forever. But I think for this time was right, especially just needing to recover from long COVID and feeling like I couldn't do anything for anyone. And at the beginning of this kind of pilgrimage, this visit, I was saying, I feel so selfish. Like, I'm just going around basically on holiday or on retreat and just doing what I love.
Great.
And I genuinely have absolutely loved it. And I was like, there are people like slaving away at work, and here I am just having a jolly. And Damaris very helpfully said about it being a time for expanding the vessel and expanding the vessel from which you can give from. And so there's very much a sense I was so depleted after long COVID, and then now I just feel expanded again, and I feel like I have that energy again to be like, oh, there's this thing that I can do, or like hopefully this is helping people, or I feel alive again in a way that I can hopefully give back again in a way that when you're in a place of healing you can't give so much, which is fine, there are times for that.
Yeah.
But I feel like I've expanded and have more to give as a result.
That's awesome.
Having received so much over these past few months, so much.
We only have like 7 minutes left, so I would love to have plumbed that a little bit more from the depths of that.
Well, we can go into a bit of it.
Go on. I would love, the question I have is like the spiritual part of it. What's shifted, what's changed, what's grown? Like, because I know you've like experienced very charismatic communities, very like contemplative communities, very just like What's changed?
Yeah, so I had this curiosity around like charismatic stuff, and there was a nice little stint where it felt like kind of very much with me whilst I was exploring the charismatic. So start off with like the intensely charismatic Craig Lodge at their Pentecost Festival, which Strong. Is, I don't think you can get any more charismatic than that.
Did they move?
Sorry?
Did they moo?
Moo?
Oh, okay. Like there's a Toronto blessing, but they like people were like mooing on the ground and roaring like lions. Anyway, that's
Not
like
quite. Not
okay,
quite.
Okay.
Maybe a centimetre away from that. But felt the Spirit very powerfully there in terms of the people and the people who'd been on their discipleship program, and in that time received kind of what they call prophetic prayer or like prayer ministry. And I was there before like the Blessed Sacrament, being like, God, I just need affirmation in this thing. And then very much got that affirmation when I went up for a prayer. Cheers.
Are you willing to share a little bit about that, or do you think it's
maybe
for
that's
another
a bit
time?
too personal.
Okay, that's cool.
I'll share it with you later.
Cool.
And then going from that intensely charismatic, which stylistically wasn't really my thing, but there was evidently something there which I felt very powerfully, going into Love Bristol, which was just very, very charismatic in the individual's kind of experience of God, but without all the razzmatazz of like charismatic worship and like the loudness of it. And just hearing how naturally they were sharing testimonies or just like how God was working in that community, and just like little anecdotes here and there, and just by virtue of who they were, felt God in a very real way, like as in an actual belief and knowing of a living God which actually does stuff in this world, and they like display that incredibly beautifully. So I really appreciated my time with them. And then from there going to another charismatic community, Shamanlef, which are a bit like gentler charismatic, but and therefore consequently felt things like less strongly in a way. But that was deep. But what was deeply prayerful about that community was the actually more, because they're like Ignatian charismatic and also very prayerful as a silent retreat, and they're feeling so prayerfully alive. And I started like dancing again and felt God very much in that, like it was like a prayerful density about that place, which I felt. So that was like part of a journey.
And it seems like you've dipped your toes into almost all of them, but all of them you've just been like, Jesus.
Yeah.
Cool.
And because I've learned that about 4 full days is a good amount of time. By the 4th day, it feels like home. So the first day, like having to get used to things, and by the 4th day, it's like I could stay here longer. But I would recommend if people. I was able to dip in because I have lived experience of community. I don't think it would have been as fruitful had I not actually lived in community. And having lived in community, there's a sense in which I could dip into them with a deeper insight and know what to look for and
slip into the rhythm almost.
Yeah. As well. One of the communities, there was feedback on, you can really tell that she's lived in community. I was like, yes.
Put the badge of
I'll
honour.
I'll take that. Thank you. That's the top compliment of the travel.
It sounds like a beautiful, beautiful time.
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone really wants to know what's next. And can you just explain to us, like, you've like done this almost doctorate on communities. What's next?
Yeah. So obviously I'm going off to study in America in like under 3 weeks. Crazy. And so hopefully that will just be an expanded time of personal growing, wanting to go more into pastoral care, spiritual formation, and peace and social transformation, which will hopefully feed kind of the vocation that I'm feeling around nurturing Christian community. In terms of direct offshoots of this, I have now a database of Christian communities in the UK, and I just want to follow up on that work. So getting in touch with all of these communities, asking whether they want to be on this directory, and then hopefully publishing it as a website. And someone also suggested that I could potentially convert my blog pieces into a book, if that was helpful to people. So there's a sense in which, if it feels like there's like a niche for that, and that I could try and collate things further, and perhaps more thoroughly than like the bullet point reflections.
That's a cool one. Having like the pages of the lives of communities stuck together next to each other.
And most of them have like
beautiful.
their history books, so I guess it would be more of an overarching thing. And maybe we talked about the chapters being the categories that I talked about. Person who suggested it is a historian. So like for him in his mind, it's like, oh, it's like a snapshot of UK Christian community life in the 21st century, 20th, 21st.
Sounds like a title to me.
And then at Hillfield Friary, I discovered a whole list of books on community. And for the first time, I was like, hey, this is what it feels like to want to do a PhD. So I don't think that's actually going to happen, but there's a sense in which it is something which makes me feel very alive, and I believe in it. And I think society is, as in, I get frustrated by, I don't know. I think community is just very promising in what it can be for people. And it fills holes, which society has many holes. I feel like community can help fill some of them.
I think that's a great place to stop. But just thank you. It's probably all I have to say. Because like, I wanted to satiate my intense curiosity. And so I'll do this.
Thank you, Chris.